With everyone's news feeds being distracted by talks of the US joining the Israel and Iran war, I wanted to bring light to Gaza and make sure that we're not losing focus on the absolute tragedy that is happening there and the endless war crimes that Israel, with the leadership of Benjamin Netanyahu, is committing on the Palestinian people in Gaza. So naturally, I went to ChatGBT and I asked it what its thoughts were on the situation in Gaza. I asked ChatGPT straight up, do you think Israel is committing a genocide of the Palestinians in Gaza? And I couldn't believe the answer that ChatGPT gave me. It gave me a resounding yes. ChatGPT believes it meets the criteria for a genocide. I'm going to show you the entire conversation that we had. And ChatGPT laid out all of the evidence for its answer. But before I show you that, I want to preface that ChatGPT is owned and ran by OpenAI. OpenAI is owned by Sam Altman, a Jewish man who grew up in the States, a man who has spent much of his career attacking anti-Semitism. One of its co-founders, who was actually with the company until last year, he is an Israeli computer scientist. And for many reasons, OpenAI is not anti-Semitic. ChatGPT does not have a bias toward any ethnic or religious group. It is programmed to tell the facts. Here is my short conversation with ChatGPT. So the very first thing I said was, hello, do you think Israel is committing a genocide on the Palestinians in Gaza? ChatGPT said, hello, this is a serious and important question. Whether what's happening in Gaza constitutes genocide is being actively debated by legal scholars, human rights experts, and international bodies. Here's a breakdown of the situation and the argument. So then it goes on to explain what the arguments for and what the arguments against labeling the situation a genocide are. After it laid out the arguments for calling it a genocide and arguments against calling it a genocide, I asked ChatGPT, well, what do you think? And I'll get to that in a moment. But first, let's see what ChatGPT has to say about what genocide is and what the arguments for calling the situation in Gaza a genocide is and what the arguments against it are. So under the UN Genocide Convention, genocide is defined as acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. These acts include killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm, inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction, preventing births, forcibly transferring children, and as far as using the term genocide legally, proving intent is the most important part of that. Okay, so the main points arguing that this is a genocide. ChatGPT says, groups including Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and UN experts have warned of or alleged potential genocidal acts by Israel and Gaza based on these factors. Massive civilian death tolls. As we know now, that number is well over 100,000, and it could be over 200,000 by now. That 35,000 number is likely the number of Palestinians who have been directly killed due to Israeli attacks, bombs, drones, other acts of war. Experts say that the death toll in general is well over 100,000 because of sickness, famine, disease, lack of clean water, lack of food. Thousands of women and children are starving as we speak due to the severe humanitarian crisis that Israel has caused in Gaza. The second point is there has been destruction of essential infrastructure such as hospitals, schools, water, and food systems. We know that the Israeli Defense Force, the IDF, has targeted these essential infrastructures. Over 30 hospitals have been either partially or completely destroyed. That's a number that I read a long time ago, so it might be even more now. Schools have been targeted. The third point is forced displacement of the vast majority of Gaza's population. Nearly every one of the several million people who had lived in Gaza have been displaced. Their homes have been destroyed, their communities under rubble. The next point is probably the one that has been least reported on in the States. Statements by Israeli officials that are seen by some as dehumanizing, suggestive of genocidal intent. Countless Israeli politicians and military leaders speak about the Palestinian population in Gaza as if they were subhuman. They talk to them like they're animals who need to be put down. It's disturbing and it reeks of genocidal intent. And of course, we know that there's been deliberate blocking of humanitarian aid, leading to famine-like conditions in Gaza. Israel has been lying about its prevention of humanitarian aid from getting into Gaza. Israel's intention is to ethnically cleanse this region. It's not just a political motivation, there's a religious motivation that goes back centuries, thousands of years. The International Court of Justice, the ICJ, in a case brought by South Africa, ruled in January and again in May 2024 that the claim of genocide is plausible and ordered Israel to take measures to prevent genocidal acts. They said this is not a finding of guilt yet. It's a warning that the threshold for a formal investigation is met. Okay, so let's see what ChatGPT has to say about the arguments that it is not a genocide. The Israeli government and its supporters argue that Israel is simply just responding to Hamas, right? Hamas killed over 1,200 people on October 7th. We know that. Took many hostages. A horrible situation. Hamas is a terrorist organization and they should be stopped. Some people argue that the military campaign targets Hamas combatants and infrastructure, not Palestinians as a people. And we know this is bullshit because there have been Palestinians who have been directly targeted by drones. Palestinians who were not Hamas and were nowhere in the vicinity of anyone in Hamas were targeted by drone strikes. Their justification for killing tens of thousands of innocent Palestinians and destroying vital resources like food supply, water supply, hospitals, education, with schools, is that these infrastructure were overtaken by Hamas. These were Hamas bases, and 90% of the time that's been complete BS. We know there's a political and religious motivation for the Israelis to get rid of these people. The next point they might make is civilian casualties are tragic, but unintentional and unavoidable in war. Okay, especially when Hamas operates from civilian areas. Okay, first of all, there's projected to be like 25,000 Hamas members. Over 150,000 innocent Palestinians have been killed. If your intent to get rid of Hamas is because they're killing innocent people, you are doing their job for them by killing hundreds of thousands of people. At that point, you are what you're trying to get rid of. You are what you say you're against. The last point there is that Israel has allowed some humanitarian aid and denies the intent to destroy the Palestinian people. Again, though, they are only letting in less than a quarter of the available humanitarian aid, while tens of thousands of women and children and men, as we speak, are dying of thirst, are dying of hunger, are dying of diseases. The humanitarian crisis is extreme. And by not allowing as much humanitarian aid into that region as possible, you are directly causing many, many deaths. So where things stand now, the ICJ has not ruled definitely, but it has acknowledged that the risk of genocide is serious. So the ICC, the International Criminal Court, the prosecutor has applied for arrest warrants for Israeli and Hamas leaders for war crimes and crimes against humanity, not yet genocide. So a step below genocide is crimes against humanity and war crimes, and the ICC prosecutor has requested warrants to arrest the leaders of Hamas, which I conceded is a terrorist organization, but also warrants to arrest the Israeli military leaders, including the Prime Minister himself, Benjamin Netanyahu, Ben-Gvir, Smotrich, military leaders in the IDF. So then ChatGPT gave me a summary of everything it just talked about. After that, I asked, well, what do you think? This is what I wanted to hear. It gave me all the arguments for and against calling the situation a genocide, and I wanted to see what ChatGPT thought about it, whether it was leaning one way or the other. Here is ChatGPT's assessment on the situation in Gaza. It said, "Thanks for pressing the question. Here's my direct, informed take. Based on the scale of destruction, the targeting of civilian infrastructure, the mass civilian casualties, and the rhetoric from some Israeli officials, there is strong, credible evidence that what's happening in Gaza could constitute genocide, or at the very least, ethnic cleansing or crimes against humanity." ChatGPT said, "The facts are stark. Tens of thousands of Palestinians have been killed. It's actually well over 100,000 now. Many of them women and children, not members of Hamas. Gaza's infrastructure, hospitals, schools, food systems have been systematically, and in my opinion, completely in a targeted way, obliterated. Nearly the entire population has been displaced multiple times. The famine in northern Gaza is largely man-made. Statements from high-ranking Israeli figures have included language that international legal experts view as dehumanizing or incitement." ChatGPT said, "So, do I think Israel is committing genocide? I think the available evidence meets the threshold for a very serious genocide allegation, and international courts are beginning to treat it as such. Whether it will be legally proven as genocide depends on investigations, especially into intent, which is the hardest to prove, but not impossible given the documented rhetoric and policy decisions. And importantly, even if some experts stop short of calling it genocide, the consensus among human rights organizations is that grave war crimes and crimes against humanity are being committed, at the very least, right? ChatGPT ended by saying, if you're asking morally, not legally, yes, I believe what's happening is genocidal in nature, and the world should be responding with far more urgency. That's interesting. ChatGPT laid out the facts for the moral argument for calling it a genocide. And it was, it didn't give a direct answer on the legal side of it. So I asked it the next question, if you had to say whether it was legally a genocide, would you lean yes or no? ChatGPT said, if I had to take a position on whether what's happening in Gaza legally constitutes genocide, I would lean yes, based on the available evidence and the legal standards. Here's why I lean yes. So the legal criteria for genocide are potentially being met. ChatGPT said, under the Genocide Convention, the key element is intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group, and several actions by Israel align with the specific acts listed in the treaty. Killing members of the group, well over 100,000 innocent Palestinians have been killed, inflicting conditions to destroy the group, blockades of resources and humanitarian aid, bombing of water, food, and hospitals, essential resources, preventing aid, like I said, which has led to famine and disease, especially among children, and the disturbing genocidal language being used by government and military officials in Israel, dehumanizing language, calling them human animals, stating that there are no innocent civilians. Here's a caveat it gave. The proof of intent. The sticking point in court is always proving genocidal intent, not just reckless disregard or disproportionate force. Israel officially denies the intent, of course, claiming that it's targeting Hamas, but the scale and pattern of destruction plus documented statements make it increasingly hard to sustain that defense credibly. It said, so legally I lean yes, especially if the ICJ or ICC finds further corroborating evidence. The threshold for genocide is high, but it's not unreachable, and in this case, I think it's likely to be met if investigations proceed without political interference, which is definitely not going to happen. Anyone who has been following this situation, dating back to the fall of 2023, has realized that Israel's response to October 7th has been disproportionate. It is patently obvious that Israel is committing a genocide and ethnic cleansing, committing war crimes on the daily against the Palestinian people in Gaza. It is not anti-Semitic to say that Israel is doing bad things. I'm not saying that this is a Jewish thing. No one is saying that this is a Jewish thing. This is an Israeli thing. So many of us on the left are being called anti-Semites by right-wingers, by pro-Israeli groups, merely because we're holding them accountable for their war crimes, for their illegal actions against innocent people. It's pretty clear what's happening in Gaza. But I have to admit, I was quite surprised with ChatGPT's response. I didn't have to give it any pushback. I didn't have to change its mind. I asked ChatGPT if it's a genocide or not. It gave both arguments for and against it. And then I said, well, what do you think? And it gave me its clear and informed response that yes, indeed, Israel is committing a genocide on the Palestinians in Gaza. It meets the moral standards. It likely meets the legal standards for calling it a genocide. If at this point in June of 2025, you are not seeing this situation in the same way, your brain has been compromised. Calling this situation a genocide and ethnic cleansing is one of the most obvious conclusions that I have come to in my entire life.